Hello, hello. It is me, Legendary. It is the end of the year, so we're here to do the final Airborne prediction yap for 2025, and this will be my final video on the topic before the dev stream. And the dev stream has been slated for mid-January, hopefully. So beyond this, there's no more material for me to really analyze or make predictions with. It's all in the air now, haha, pun intended. But at this point, we will just have to see what DevMan will be cooking in the next couple of weeks so that we get to try it out and play it. So yeah, this will be the final video for the series, and then we'll move on to whatever the future for Foxhole is afterwards. Right, so let's do a quick recap of what the current state of affairs are like. A few things have happened since my last Airborne prediction video, which was around August time. So let's quickly just touch base with where we're at and what the remainder for this video will be. So the devs have announced that the dev stream will happen sometime in January. It will probably not be the first week or the second week of January. From prior experience, dev streams tend to happen around the third or fourth Tuesday of every single month. So I'm going to bank on that prediction for January as well. We will most likely see the Airborne prediction video around the second or third Tuesday for this coming January. And then Airborne will be slated for release in February, which is a month later. This is a good thing, as dev branch is very, very important for us to actually go and find bugs, test things, and obviously have an opportunity to discuss game balance. And this is one of the few times where the devs actually take feedback for game balance and considers it for the live war or the update war that follows. So I highly recommend that anyone who's interested in Airborne and wants to have a direct impact on what the aircraft will be like or how they will perform before the update releases in February, that you sign up for the dev branch. It usually comes out on the same day as dev stream, so immediately after the dev stream, make sure that you follow along with the instructions on how to get up and going with that. I highly recommend everyone play on dev branch so we can find bugs and we can identify problems straight away. It will also probably be the only real opportunity that we have a chance to risk-free try the flying mechanic. Similar to how we got to test the submersion mechanic for the Naki submarine when it first came out with the naval update, without us having to lose said expensive toy. So yeah, please go test. Please report bugs. Please don't hide bugs. That's super annoying when people do that, but get involved. Right. So since then, a couple of things have happened with the state of Foxhole. We are currently now in World Conquest 130, and we are now playing, I think, the third or fourth month now of update 62, which is the last update before Airborne. Unfortunately, update 62 was slated as a maintenance patch, so the devs have probably been working on things in the background, like server performance, as well as probably cleaning up a lot of the network code to prepare for Airborne. So a lot of surface things didn't really see much change for this latest version of Foxhole. Basically, the only real significant changes that we are playing around with now is tier 2 bunker-based spam has been slightly nerfed with the increase of the howitzer garrison and the AT garrison. Intel centers and storm cannons got heavily nerfed in their power consumption as well as their fire rate. Storm cannons specifically basically stagnated the game quite a lot, so devs have been very heavy-handed in nerfing those. And then mostly it's just been bug and exploit fixes. There were some interesting changes that occurred in the patch notes. I won't go into too much detail because that's not the point of this video, but obviously the devs have been quite on the ball with making sure that at least some of these things are cleaned up. And then we also had a relic war, which is kind of fun, but of course has no bearing to the significance of what Airborne will be like. There was also one blog post about Airborne. and this was also released around the same time as the maintenance update. And this was the last bit of information that we got before the devs have gone radio silent and just focusing on making sure the game is ready for January/February. So I will be adding this content into today's video, and hopefully with this add to my predictions that I made previously, as well as sort of expand a little bit about what I think the final product that we're going to be playing with is going to be like. So this blog post basically is the last bone that the devs threw at us. So I will be meticulously going over it and taking a look at how that applies to my previous predictions, see how that coincides with some of the things that I said earlier last year, and then hopefully paint a complete picture, at least what I think Airborne will be like in January/February. Right, so we have some new facts that we got. First, scout planes were confirmed. So at least I was somewhat in the ballpark with how the engagement level with Airborne is going to be like. So scout planes are clearly the entry point. It's basically the armored car to tanking or the gunboat to naval. This is what we're hoping to be playing with early on or midway through the war without having to invest a massive facility to build the more expensive toys. I still believe that all airplanes are going to be facility locked. So scout planes, you will still have to go and at the bare minimum build a assembly pad of some kind. Maybe it'll be an assembly pad that's been upgraded with the motor pool variant. Maybe that will be the entry point to make scout planes, but I still don't think that you will just go up to a garage and hammer one out and then put it on a flatbed and then take it to an airfield and then take off. I don't think we're going to see an interaction like that. So at bare minimum, get ready to build an assembly pad. It'll probably be tier locked, so you'll probably only get it in like tier 2 or tier 3 in the tech tree. But it's there. And I think this will be the first thing that everyone is going to be flying, getting practice in, because this looks like the cheap and ineffective way to get into the skies. Additionally, dive bombers have been confirmed, and dive bombers seem to have a limited amount of ordnance, but probably can be deployed and fielded very quickly. I do have a bit of a prediction when it comes to where these dive bombers play within the meta, as they're quite distinct compared to the large bomber classes that we've already seen in some of the trailers. So this clearly has a area of use in terms of like the strategic value for dive bombers. And that is definitely something that I will be talking about today. And near the end of the video, you're really going to start to see how these parts sort of shift into position. Right. Then we got a large we got a large image that explained how the hangars worked. And this was sort of one of the final pieces that I was missing at the end of the last video, because devs really have not been explaining how Airborne interacts with the existing ground assets that we have, besides bombing them, obviously. But here we actually have some information, and I'll be breaking down this hangar image in a little bit more detail throughout this video, as I do think that the most important thing that we can draw for Airborne now is completely based on the tech levels that we have with these airfields that the devs have gone and give us some samples for. So this is probably the most significant thing that we now know for Airborne, and this will ultimately affect what the outcome for every single airplane interaction is going to have. Right, and I'll be breaking down hangars near the end of the video as well. Cool, so let's first have a discussion about plane classes. We've seen now that the devs are very interested in producing a varied amount of plane assets that we can play with. And to me, this means that Airborne is more along the lines of an update like Entrenched or Inferno, where the update wasn't just a side asset that gets pinned onto the game like Naval Warfare was. Naval Warfare did fundamentally change a lot of how water assets interacted with the game world, but fundamentally, nothing really got added that didn't exist in previous versions of Foxhole. So before Naval Update, we did have certain ways that we could go and do naval invasions, and naval waterways played an important role in how we set up certain attack patterns. But ultimately, the end goal, the strategic depth that Naval added, was very, very, very foundational compared to what we're going to be getting with Airborne. And I would put this on par with Inferno now. So Inferno completely changed how we played the game. Added facilities, added tank variants, added trains, and I feel that Airborne is going to significantly change how we play the game out. And this is going to be very tied into aircraft tiers. Same way how we have tank tiers. So obviously, when light tanks are teched, it's not that significant compared to something like ballistas being teched or SPGs teching. There are certain milestones within Foxhole that once we get them, it completely changes how we fundamentally design bases and how we respond to attacks. Not to mention artillery, but artillery was sort of always in the game. But in Inferno, they changed how artillery was produced, so there were some small fixes along those lines. But now with Airborne, devs have clearly demonstrated that we're going to have multiple tiers of aircraft. Scout planes, like I said, is going to be the entry level airplane. That's where you're going to be learning how to fly, and you will also probably not be able to get very far or do much with the actual aircraft itself. It might literally just be, like I said, a armored car level threat, or it might be something like a motorcycle or an Argonaut or any other LUV or Logi truck level vehicle that you create. But the significance of it is still important because that's the way that people get to try flying airplanes. Around mid-war, that's probably where we're going to start seeing the significance of fighters and dive bombers, or a light bomber of some kind. And then obviously the big thing that we've mostly been orientated around with has been the bombers and the transport planes. And bombers is a significant threat on the battlefield. This is probably going to have the most impact in how we play the game. So everything else that leads up to it will basically orient how we build up to these assets and how we counterplay them. So this is why we have things like scouts, fighters, and dive bombers to a degree to be a threat and a counter push to these late game assets that will definitely be devastating and something to have a cause for concern with. Now, the reason why this is important is because this plays very similar to how tanks work in the game, and to a lesser degree also naval, with the exception of maybe frigates and destroyers. And the point I'm trying to make with this is, if the enemy just starts rolling out super heavies and battle tanks, they can still be overwhelmed and counterplayed by the previous tiers. So that is basically how it's going to play out for Airborne as well. If the enemy just builds bombers and they have complete bomber supremacy and they just start bombing everything that you have, you need to employ fighters and dive bombers and scouts to see the attacks coming, counterplay them, and push them back a lot. So playing classes more so than ever is going to have a significant outcome for how battles play out. And I would basically pin my entire prediction on how bombers are going to be fielded, what their ranges are going to be like, and how do you counterplay them, because that's going to be that's what's going to make up the rest of the sort of dynamic tree that is the rock paper scissors counterplay system that Foxhole sometimes employs. Right. So vehicle tiers, very important. Bombers now have more threats to them. There might even be more in the works. We don't know. But this is what the devs have been showing thus far. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Cool. So what did we learn from the final concept art? What do we now know going forward for the rest of Airborne? Where do we put our hopes and dreams into? Well, first, we now know more a little bit about ammunition type. And again, this plays out how these different assets interact with each other. On the concept art, and I know this isn't the most reliable source for information because concept art sometimes is wrong, but we do have a guideline that the devs are aiming to achieve with some of the assets being introduced to the game. Specifically, bombs and torpedoes has been listed as a direct item that is being hauled by these new hangar facilities that the devs have showcased. And bombs and torpedoes, one of these things we don't have an in-game asset for, and that will probably be something that we will now have to produce. So chances are bombs are going to be produced in ammo factories. We might have a variant of the ammo factory that specifically makes aeronautical based equipment. And I do think that bombs specifically are going to be obviously be used by the bombers and now the dive bomber class that the devs have now showcased. Torpedoes is a different beast. Torpedoes will probably still be produced in their usual slot in the large shell factory for an ammo factory. And I do think that dive bombers will probably have the ability to use torpedo assets. Now, this might not exactly line up with the sort of concept art that was showcased, but because you can put torpedoes inside of hangars, I would venture as far as saying that there will be some class of aircraft, if not, we've already seen it, type of plane that will field them. Now, I've had this discussion with a couple people before as well, where they're saying, yeah, we're probably going to get torpedoes, but it's probably going to be a different type of torpedo. It's going to be like a smaller torpedo. However, I don't think the devs are going to go down that route. I think Foxhole's already a very complicated game. And back in the day, a lot of the different game assets had different forms of ammunition and different interactions with that ammunition to be used in these weapons. So, for example, back in the day, if you wanted to use a sniper rifle, you needed to make sniper ammo. And sniper ammo was very, very expensive. And a lot of the times, when people made sniper rifles, because it sort of shared the mantra of being a rifle, a lot of players got confused and didn't bring the correct type of ammunition with it. So you ran into a scenario where you had relic bases and bunker bases with snipers in them, but no ammo to use them. And I feel like that has had a lingering design decision for all assets that's been released for Foxhole since that change went into place. It's the same reason why Colonials don't have a specific Colonial fire rocket variant to use with their fire rocket tankette. They just universally use the fire rockets that both factions can produce. So I think that this is still going to hold true for the design of dive bombers or torpedo-specific ordnance that is being used by these weapons. I struggle to see a justification for why we would have to make a different type of torpedo that might not have the same impact, literally and figuratively speaking, than the current Moray torpedo weapon that we have in game. So, I do think bombs are on the table now. We're probably going to make a facility for it. Torpedoes will still be used from the existing assets that we have. And I do predict that we're probably going to be using the same torpedoes. Just because the devs have really shied away from not having weapon uniformity in their game assets since the removal of sniper ammo and the old AT rifle ammo as well. same update, same sort of thing that happened. Right. The other thing that we can now sort of look at is some of the more ingrained weapons that are on these on these vehicle classes as well. Notably, the dive bomber had a label text saying storm rifles, so now we at least know that the bare minimum size ammunition that we're going to be playing around with will be storm rifles, so 7.92 millimeter, and we've clearly seen it on the dive bomber concept art itself, but obviously the Scout also had a machine gun type weapon on it. This could very well be 12.7, but I kind of erring on the fact that Scout planes are probably not going to be very effective, so it's probably not going to be 12.7, because 12.7 probably will be the main way to damage and take down aircraft, whereas 7.92 is probably going to be more like breaking down defenses, and then the 12.7 goes and finishes it off. So because of that, I'm erring on the side that Scout planes will probably also only use 7.92 at best or at worst. And at least now, devs have clearly labeled that what some of these weapon assets are, and we can sort of predict what they're going to be using. For bombers, notably, I've sort of kind of guessed that it was mostly going to be 12.7, and when I sort of reevaluated the different weapon attachments from the footage that we had, obviously this one is from the original Airborne trailer, it was very much a MG with the sort of double bullet guard on the back of the bomber that we've saw in the trailer, and this very much lines up with the same 12.7 machine gun that we see on the Conqueror class destroyer. And obviously these are colonial assets, so I could probably predict that bombers will stick to 12.7, and again will be the premier threat in the air. So this is the type of weapon assets that they're going to be playing around with. Right. The other thing that I kind of had looked at was more along the lines of what the Scout planes will really hope to achieve. And again, this is another sort of prediction from one of my previous videos where I kind of said that airplanes would need to bear some significance on the outcomes of ground-based battle, or else what's the point in making them? So because the Warden Scout plane basically aligns with it being an amphibious type of aircraft due to its sort of pontoon landing gear, or again, not entirely sure how that's going to play out. But this to me means that Scouts will have to be able to do something against naval threats. It would be quite folly for the devs to release the Scout plane, and then the only thing that it can realistically do in something like island hexes or coastal hexes, or even lake hexes, would be the ability to decrew gunboats. And specifically, maybe the Warden Scout plane is very well suited at decrewing the colonial gunboat, just because the colonial gunboat isn't that well off for defending its crew based on the design of it. But still, it should be able to counter the threat of a gunboat causing trouble. So I still think at the very least that the dual cockpit Warden Scout class plane that we've seen will probably have a secondary weapon, which could literally be the ability to deploy HE mortars and drop them on top of gunboats. Because at the very least, this would make gunboats be countered by something like a swarm of scout planes, or maybe this will now be a way for us to QRF a Sharon armed with fire mortars shelling your naval island facility, for example. So maybe this will be something that we can now do, and I think this lines up pretty well with the overall design that we've seen with the Warden Scout. So mortars probably on the table, so this will be another way for us to attack specifically gunboats, but where we now have an asset that could actually hold up against large ships. Sure, might not do that much, but keep in mind that over the course of naval warfare, countering large ships have more devolved to actually disabling the threat of the large ship as opposed to outright sinking them. Of course, it's still a monumentous achievement when a frigate or a destroyer or a battleship or a submarine gets destroyed and everyone celebrates and everyone's super happy that it happens. But if a frigate or a destroyer is coming into a naval hex to attack your base or to attack a facility or attack a factory town or anything like that, the most immediate and important counterplay that one of these large naval assets is focused on would be to disable its threat that it causes. And the main way that this happens is by removing its ability to fire its primary guns. So that either means turreting a frigate or destroyer, or if you have access to submarines, is you put a large hole inside of its ammo compartment so that the guns can no longer reload. Now, I think that scout planes and some of the other planes that we are going to take a look at, obviously, will primarily focus on this gameplay loop. Instead of these small planes being able to outright destroy a frigate or a destroyer, they will probably be able to disable it through the use of HE mortars, and at least pose somewhat of a counterplay option, other than another naval weapon. So I think that's more or less the design that we're going to go with this particular ammunition type. And I do think that the Warden Scout plane sort of aligns with this overall design. All right. Unfortunately, that is pretty much all we really got from the concept art when it comes to what else we get to play with. Obviously, we now see that we have dive bombers. Chances are they're probably going to still do the same amount of damage type as the main bomber, but the main key thing when it comes to dive bombers is they're probably going to come out at a different tech tier. Additionally, like I said, dive bombers might drop the Moray torpedo. I know that in the concept art they sort of show just a basic bomb being dropped, but I wouldn't put it too far away that the devs could probably make it so that this ammo type is interchangeable with the different type or different weapon or ammunition types that we have in other vehicles itself. And a lot of the game assets has been changing to align with that design as well. For example, a couple of patches ago, the devs changed how the colonial grenade, mounted grenade launcher works. The Fischero previously had weapon slots for all types of grenades, and then they changed it so that it becomes a generic ammo type. And I feel like that's where the dive bomber really comes into play. So the dive bomber might be something where you can only attach a really big bomb to it, or you could attach a torpedo to it, and then you are a threat to large naval assets invading your shoreline. And then in terms of what the bomber's probably going to drop, I don't think we're going to see anything really other than what the main original video showcased. So the main bomber is going to probably do a lot of devastation damage with the like a 120 millimeter or 150 millimeter style bomb. And again, those assets we will be building inside of our various ammo factories or ammo factory variants that might come out. Right. But most important, I do think that the dive bomber probably has interchangeable ammo. It would be kind of odd if we had to build an aircraft to specifically deploy a specific ordnance every single time. Simply because we haven't seen that game design for quite a while. We've only realistically seen them when the devs decided to fill in asymmetry gaps with the release of the Symphony and the Carnix rocket launcher. But gunboats specifically come to mind because the naval asset that is gunboats right now are quite multi-purpose use weapons. And I do feel like that design probably is going to get into Airborne. And I would probably say that this might be future-proofing some other new weapons that the devs might add at a later stage. I would really love to have napalm ordnance inside of my aircraft. I mean, I say that, but I would also hate to have to fire QRF every single day when a firebomber drops napalms on my lovely facility. But realistically speaking, if the devs are inclined to be using that new multi-slot asset that they added to the game, I would say that dive bombers and bombers will probably be the thing where they implement it. So now we will have to go and see. All right. The next thing is that I'd like to talk about asymmetry. And obviously, Foxhole is an asymmetric game. One side has one thing, one side has the other thing, but generally speaking, you still have the same outcomes to these weapons being applied to the battlefield. And I've had this discussion a couple times as well with a couple of people regarding how these some asymmetrical ordnance or asymmetrical systems come into the game. But I think it's important to note that Airborne is going to be a little bit different. And I truly think that the devs are spending time and implementing assets in such a way that we're not going to have a diverse asymmetric experience with the content when it comes out. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is exactly. So previously, the two major updates that Foxhole had was Foxhole Inferno and Foxhole Naval Warfare. And they released with a very clear asymmetric split. And the thing about the asymmetric split in those releases was it was an absolute nightmare to balance the game experience or the gameplay experience that either faction had to play with. And notably, the main asset that really, really messed with things was the gimmicks that they added for those specific releases. Now, what do I mean by gimmicks? Inferno obviously released fire weapons. Fire weapons was a significant and impactful weapon that was used when it first came out. Back in the day, fire was incredibly difficult to counterplay with what the devs released for firefighting counterplay measures. Now, what I mean by this is, simply put, when Inferno dropped, only one side really got to use fire weapons on the initial offset. And that was primarily the Warden side, because Wardens were the only faction that had the ability to shoot fire rockets. And fire rockets were a nightmare, because the amount of devastation that caused when a spread of fire rockets hit a tier 2 bunker base was basically incalculable. And there was no real counterplay to it. Because back in the day, the devs didn't release fire trucks or automated fire suppression units that we had in the Builder update. No. The only thing that we had was buckets. And back in the day, buckets could only hold one charge of water that barely even worked. So when Inferno released, we were stuck in a situation where one side clearly got to have fun with the fire mechanic, and the other one did not. And this was a very clear evidence of an asymmetric release. It was not great, and it took the devs basically 6 months worth of panic to really get the fire mechanic under control. And during that time, one faction had a lot of fun with the fire mechanics, the other faction did not. And I don't think the devs are going to go down that route again. So, in Airborne, I believe that aircraft classes is going to be what the asymmetric... aircrafts are going to be asymmetric, but the aircraft classes are going to be the symmetry that the devs are aiming to achieve. So this doesn't mean that we're going to have a carbon copy of every single type of airplane that we see for one specific faction, but we are going to have similar gameplay experiences for the type of planes that each faction will have access to. And at no point do I believe that the devs are going to release one class of airplanes for one faction and not make it available to the other one. I don't think we're going to go down that route, because then we're going to run into the same experience that we had with the fire mechanic from Inferno. And that was not great. And it let a lot of people very upset, and basically caused a lot of players to faction switch permanently, because the devs just didn't really think through what introducing one asset to one faction would do. So I think the devs have learned their lesson with that one. So I don't think we're going to go into that situation. But aircrafts, or aircraft in general, are going to be asymmetric, but their class will be symmetric. So what does this ultimately mean? We've now seen that we have a Warden Scout. It's designed to be amphibious, and it will probably be doing things with storm rifles, and like I predicted, something to do with HE motors to counterplay naval assets. I believe that this class will be symmetrical for the colonial side as well. Now, we have absolutely no idea what the Collie Scout looks like or what it will be doing, but I do believe that it will also be an amphibious type of airplane. I would be quite shocked if the devs decided to add in another asset that's uniquely to the one faction and not make it available for the other one. So because of this, even though both sides will probably get a scout, and they probably will both be amphibious, the difference between the two will come down to how they are fielded. Now, I have absolutely no idea what the Colonial Scout will probably be like, so as a rough guesstimate, maybe the Colonial Scout will be more aligned with using 30mm as opposed to mortars and 7.92. Maybe the Colonial Scout will be a little bit more effective in providing ground support, whereas the Warden one will probably be a little bit more suited for providing naval support. Maybe that's the asymmetry that the devs are going to go for. But in terms of, will my one scout on my one faction be able to land on water or deploy from water or whatever water interaction it's going to have, versus the other faction not having that? Probably won't be the case. So everything that the devs release will probably follow along basically along the guidelines of, it will have a basic interaction, and then it will have a faction specific twist to that interaction, which will shape its use case. So, like I said, the scout planes, their primary feature, I think, will be spotting enemies and providing a brief level of airborne fighting or airborne combat system. And for the Warden one, we've seen a storm rifle style weapon, and I predict that there's probably going to be the ability to drop a mortar out the window or something like that. And the colonial equivalent might be a very rudimentary ISG or something like that allows you to at least damage some ground-based assets. So maybe the Colonial Scout, like I said, will be something that you use to remove watchtowers or destroy tier 1 pillboxes, because that is a gameplay loop that is very, very appealing on the Warden side because of the use, well, the general use of the Cutler RPG being able to one-shot most sort of tier 1 structures. So maybe this is something that the Collie Scout plane will now be able to do better than the Warden one. And then that design philosophy can hold true for all the other assets that might see, inside the different weapon tiers that we have. So maybe the Warden fighter plane, which is the asset that we've seen, will be able to dual fire both 7.92 and machine gun ammo. So maybe that will make it the best air superiority fighter. But obviously, the colonial equivalent might be more flexible in its use case. Again, it will still be able to counteract enemy bombers, because that's what its primary class purpose is going to be. But again, maybe it is better at strafing, so they'll add like a 30 mil cannon to it. Again, just slap on an ISG or something along those lines. And the same holds true for dive bombers. So both dive bombers, both the colonial class of dive bomber and the warden class of dive bomber, will be able to deploy the Moray torpedo, as well as provide a little bit of defense using 792 storm cannons. But maybe the asymmetry portion comes down to the unique weapon types that they will be able to use. So the Warden one will use the Shatterer missile, and maybe it can hold a couple of Shatterer missiles, because obviously the Shatterer missile has a much lower chance to breach concrete compared to the Colonial Fury 250 round. But the main gameplay loop is the same for the aircraft class types, just with that asymmetrical twist. And additionally, I do think that there will be some assets that's just purely symmetrical, because there won't be a real different way to go about it. And we also see those types of assets in other aspects of Foxhole's warfare. SPGs, for example, both shoot 150mm rounds, and very much have the same type of effect on the battlefield. They're able to combat and fight things like bunker bases. Now, of course, this comes with some asymmetry to it, like a very, very small amount, but fundamentally, they shoot the same ordnance, they're built the same way, they have the same cost, but the end goal of them is to have the same type of gameplay experience. And I hold that the bomber, because the bomber is going to be so significant in the outcomes of wars, that it will probably be fairly symmetric in the way that they are going to be fielded and used. And the same for transport planes. All right, so we are going to see asymmetry, but the asymmetry is going to be very, very surface compared to the asymmetry that we currently see in Foxhole. And this is purely because I don't think the devs will run into this scenario over here. Right. And again, just to further establish this point, here's another example of where asymmetry was bad. When Naval Warfare released, one side got to play with the cool new mechanic that is figuring out how underwater works and, balancing the water levels in the ballasts to make it submerge and being invisible and not being detected on radar. And the other faction had the counterplay. I don't think we're going to see this ever again. At least not with Airborne. So for the devs to just go and say, hey, listen, transport planes, paratroopers, that is colonial only. Wardens, you guys get an amphibious scout plane. I don't think that's going to be the case, because this is going to drive away the entire gameplay experience from one faction to the other. So unless the devs are planning on doing something like that, I have reason to believe that probably won't be the case anymore. And this probably is why we experienced an Airborne delay. I think that they're trying to figure out balancing these two tables and making sure that the entire gameplay population doesn't just flock to the colonial side because only the colonials have a transport plane. There'll probably be a Warden transport plane, but obviously some of the asymmetry might come back. Cool. All right, so moving on. Hangars. Let's talk about hangars. This is one of the last bit of information that I was missing to do some of my previous YAP videos, but we obviously got some of the hangar assets in concept art. So now we can talk a little bit about what they are. Cool. So in the concept art, we were shown three main structures. This will be the large hangar, the small hangar, and the tiered runways. And the key thing that I want to dial in for this section is the fact that we have runways of different tier level. Runways and airfields will be world spawns. This was shown near the top of the concept art, there is a asset that literally says world spawn hangar or something like that. So that is where we're going to be deploying our aircraft from. Previously, I said that the hangars and airfields will probably be facility built. That might still be the case to a degree, but I think the positioning of hangars is now going to be dev controlled. And what I mean by dev controlled is way back in the day, nuke sites that we used to be able to build for the different factions was the significance of the nuke was chosen by the devs in terms of its world placement. And I think that part of the gameplay experience has now been moved back into the devs' hands. There might be some reasoning behind this, and I'll talk about it in just a bit. But for the most part, it looks like hangars will be decided upon by the devs. And obviously, the different assets that we have with them will be able to dictate how these airfields will be able to be used. The key thing to keep in mind with the concept art is they showcased that these assets are modular in design. So they're kind of like how G houses and town halls work. There is no pre-designed, pre-fixed shape that an airfield will have. So this leads me to believe it won't be the same sort of asset that we had with dry docks, which I previously predicted. So I may have gotten that one wrong. So instead of the airfield being player built, requiring a large amount of space, this might be just an asset that they will place and we have to build. So maybe we'll get to renovate some of the old airfields that are already present in the game world. And I mean, for example, go look at Breaker Town in Slyke and Shelf. That's very much an airfield that's just run down. Maybe that's something that we get to build up. But because the devs get to decide where the airfields go and the hangars get placed, I think the most important part that this has on the impact of the game for us will be how aircraft will have limited range. So again, previously in one of my older videos, I kind of said that airplanes will just be able to go anywhere that they want. But because we now have dev-chosen spawn locations for airplanes, this means that this is now a mechanic that they're going to use to prevent us from doing things like completely going into backlines and disrupting and destroying facility structures, for example. So my prediction with this is airfield tiers will literally define what the aircraft roles are going to be. So devs are basically rolling a little bit of that freedom back to us. From us. And in the concept art, we got to see at least 3 tiers of airfields. So we had the metal/dirt airfield, we had the concrete airfield, and then we had the asphalt airfield. And I believe that you will only be able to deploy certain aircraft onto these airfields depending on its tier level. Or, let me put it this way, effectively allow you to deploy it. You probably could deploy a bomber onto a dirt runway, probably not a good idea, and probably lead to the bomber going on a one-way trip. But I think this will generally be the correct way that different aircraft will be fielded. And this will ultimately end up with what effective range each airfield will have on the rest of the game world. So, for example, with the tier 1 airfield, so basically you just build it as it stands, that will only be an effective way to deploy scouts. And like I said, scouts will probably only be a introductory level aircraft with some very small amount of QRF gameplay loop behind it, and probably won't be doing a lot of attacking with it. So this means that we can limit, or the devs can limit, the amount of effectiveness of aircraft by the different tiers that we will be able to build. And obviously with tier 2 being a lot more usable by things like fighters and bombers, will allow us to protect assets into a more forward position from 1 hex back. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let's assume that the main front right now is Endless Shore, and we have a tier 2 airfield that is available in Slack and Shelf. That means that we can at least protect some of the frontline assets from bombing raids 1 hex backwards, which is not something that we would be able to do with a tier 1 airfield. So being able to build these airfields and upgrade them accordingly will significantly impact what we can deploy there and how we can use it. And ultimately, tier 3 airfields, this is going to be the scary one. So there is a significant difference between tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3. Well, specifically tier 3 with the other two, because tier 3 is where transports and bombers probably can get deployed from. And the way that the concept art kind of lays it out, we might even not need to be able to build a lot of the actual airfield assets until we upgrade the runway that comes with it. So, for example, bombers and transports clearly need to be deployed from the large hangar. But maybe something like fighters, dive bombers, and scouts only need a small hangar. And again, this was something that was showcased in the concept art as well. Because specifically, scouts and fighters, we know, only come from the tier 2 hangar asset. But the bombers and the transports, I mean, that kind of looks like a bomber sitting at that large facility building. That will probably be something that gets deployed from there. So, in my opinion, the tier 3 airways are going to be a nuke level threat. So, we've seen the bombers being used for absolutely everything. And to prevent bombers from destroying your naval assets, destroying your ground forces, destroying your MPF hexes or your refinery towns or whatever you manage to build as a poor ground plebeian, you will need to get your entire faction to go and destroy basically the old nuke site, but now it prints bombers. So I think that tier 3 airfields is basically the next super weapon that we have in Foxhole. So previously it was the storm cannon. They kind of winded the storm cannon a little bit by adding in barrel heating. Nuke sites, always a threat. Battleships, always a threat, because if the battleship shows up, everyone stops what they're doing to go and kill it. Tier 3 airfields is the next big one. And basically, if you don't have the means to destroy a tier 3 airfield or to prevent bombers from launching from it, either by destroying the runway, maybe through a dive bomber, hint, hint, then you're basically going to lose everything that it can get in range with. So if this is the effective range of a tier 3 airstrip, everything inside that circle is going to change to whoever owns that tier 3 airfield. So I think this is what's going to be the main gameplay loop that we're going to be playing around. The building and fielding of tier 3 airfields and having assets that can counter it. This dials back to the fact that we have things like tiered airplanes like the dive bomber. Because I think the dive bomber being able to drop maybe not the same amount in ordnance of a main bomber will at least be able to mess up the runways or maybe to reset them. Because the other thing to keep in mind is tier 3 runways requires asphalt, which is made from concrete and oil. At least that's what the concept art says. So this means that airfields will be wet concrete. And wet concrete could be reset very easily by something like a dive bomber or bomber itself. So, yes, I definitely think that this is the next super weapon in Foxhole. Tier 3 runways, you have to go and fight it. You have to go and fight it, and you have to go and kill it. If you don't, like I said, everything in the circle will turn to whoever owns the airfield. Because at the end of the day, low G is basically infinite in the game. As long as the asset is able to send out bombers to go and attack it, we just have a reusable nuke site. And it'll be a lot of fun for people who own it. So I think that's what the main thing about airfields is going to be like. And it's all going to play within this trifecta of getting the airfield to tier 3, either disrupting that airfield from being able to do its thing. And if you can't stop it, that's basically it. That is the end of the war, at least for whatever's in range for that asset. Because bombers are going to level everything. The devs have clearly shown it in the showcase videos. It destroys naval assets. It destroys tanks. It destroys MPF towns. So everything is going to play around this trifecta. Right. The other way that airfields play within the game world is the devs can actually limit how certain gameplay loops will play out for specific wars. Notably, one of the things that they could do is they can artificially limit certain airfields from not getting to tier 3. So, for example, we might have airfields that only has a small hangar asset on it. What if the devs in their modular design for hangars just say, okay, this airfield that we've pre-placed in the world for this war will not spawn a large hangar on it. This means that you can only build it up to tier 2 and you can only deploy tier 2 assets into it. So because of this, we might run into a scenario where we only have airfields that are used for QRF purposes. And I think this will, at bare minimum, be a thing for most backline hexes when it comes to at least having tier 1 airfields. So that if enemy aircraft manages to get into your backline, you're able to effectively QRF it with scout planes or maybe fighter planes or something along those lines. But they don't want you to have, these devastating weapons in the backline hexes. So they're just going to artificially prevent it from being able to do more beyond its intended boundaries. Now, the other thing that this could play in is the placement of tier 3 airfields will significantly impact the gameplay experience that we will have for that particular war. So, for example, one of the things that the devs have been toying around with is this idea of putting mass production factories on islands. We've only seen this a couple times on the Able War, but this is definitely something that the devs can experiment with. In some wars, we had MPFs and refineries and factories on island hexes, which caused us to go and play, or basically forced us to play on those hexes because we had to. I feel like with the introduction of tier 3 airstrips and being able to deploy bombers from it, and bombers probably having the most range in the game, this will probably impact the decision making when it comes to the release of a map for a particular war. So in this example that I have over here, if an airfield is predicated to only being tier 1 because it only has a small hangar on it for a particular war, then a lot of people probably won't be fighting over that particular region whatsoever. However, if the dev announced the following war, and they say that this particular hex will now have a tier 3 runway on it, this again should trigger a, oh wow, you can build nukes on an island sort of scenario, because now you have a tier 3 asset or a tier 3 runway asset available for the entire of that war. You're going to see a significantly larger amount of people playing on the island hexes, and those would see a lot more. That would ultimately affect what the strategic decisions is going to take place to make sure that asset lies within your hands when it gets to the point where you can make bombers. So again, having the ability to predicate where different tiered airfields can spawn in the game world will significantly impact how certain wars play out. So in this example again, World Conquest 140 probably won't see any naval gameplay at all because it's only a tier 1 airfield. You can only do scouts with it. Okay, who cares? But if it suddenly was able to do tier 3 in the following war, it would be the same as if an MPF was spawned on that island. So it's just another tool for the devs to decide how certain parts of the game plays out. All right. So at this point, that's it for the majority of the predictions when it comes to the assets that were revealed to us by the devs. So I have some closing thoughts for what Airborne is going to be like. I sort of have like a final checklist of what I think the gameplay experience is going to be. And then I also have some shower thought concerns that I have with Airborne. Now that we know what we know, and I've done the predictions that I've had until this point. Now, keep in mind, like I said, a lot of this is still predictions. I have no idea what Airborne is going to bring to the game. So educated guesses is what's going to happen here, and a lot of assumptions. A lot of assumptions. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But with the way that things are going with Foxhole right now, I don't think I'm too far off the ballpark with what the gameplay experience is going to be. So, here's the final prediction summary. I still hold that we're going to have some form of air layer or stratosphere layer, and that's how moving aircraft between regions will play out. I just find it so arbitrary that you would have to fly an airplane and slam into a border wall to then cross into another hex. I feel like that probably is a very dated system. And the devs have been experimenting with seamless border travel. Well, not even border travel, with seamless region travel in Anvil Empires. So maybe we get to see a bit of a taste of that with Airborne. In the case of when you fly from one region to another, you have to do it through a air-specific only border travel mechanic. Weather, like I said, will also be a significant impact of where you can deploy air assets into. I truly believe that weather stations were not just added for role-playing reasons, as the devs sort of indicated in the weather update. Severe weather will probably be more impactful for certain assets being able to be used. For example, you would need to know that there's a storm in your attacking region. If you don't do that and you fly your bomber in, your bomber might just disintegrate into tiny little splinters if you're not prepared. So I think being able to predict weather and at the very least put the little weather icon on the map will probably be important. Then aircraft will exclusively facility locked. I will be very surprised if you are able to MPF bombers. It would be very strange because all major gameplay assets that have released in the last 3 years have all been facility locked. Large ships, super heavy battle tanks, absolutely everything that the devs have been introducing to the game have been facility locked. So even the entry level aircraft that we have, I think facilities are so well ingrained within the Foxhole war economy right now that everyone will be able to at least be able to use a small assembly station to do a thing. Specifically, we see small assembly stations being used for making fire trucks and small trains. That's the sort of like entry level bunker base building and facility structure or vehicles that we have in the game. So I think Airborne is probably going to go along those lines as well. You'll have to make the aircraft at them, and just like a dry dock, you would have to transport the parts to assemble the plane, or the completed plane only being assemblable at a small hangar or large hangar, respectively. So get used to putting aircraft on the back of a truck and taking it to your local airfield before you can deploy it. Kind of like how real aircraft work. Kind of. Anyway, so yes, aircraft facility locked. And I also think that we are probably going to have to get a new type of resource to make them. I think the rare economy in Foxhole is incredibly stretched thin right now. Basically, all big toys require rare alloys, and rare alloys you can only get through a gacha game of scooping salvage fields. I would be I'd be very, 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 very concerned if the only way that you can make your scout plane is to be a large regiment and being able to scoop rare alloys to make it. So I think a better alternative like this, specifically go take a look at my facilities Yap video, was specifically we are going to have a new type of special rare sulfur or rare coal or rare oil that is produced as a byproduct from standing facility buildings. I don't think the devs are going to make us scoop a new type of resource or have a new mine that we need to camp or anything like that. I don't think that will probably be added because it will cause more problems than solve. It's either that or maybe Airborne, I'm completely wrong, and Air doesn't use any rare materials at all. And we just have to make air assets using a metric ton of refined materials and refined coal products and refined oil products. That might also be the path that we go down to. But I really hope we're not just scooping for rare metals, because that gameplay loop is getting very annoying and very boring, and I would rather it be just an automated byproduct or as a sort of a reward for running an oil field facility and things like that. Maybe the devs can play around with that idea. Okay, ground versus air. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of ground versus air assets. I do believe that the game is in a current state where we basically have pretty much everything that we need for a frontline assault. So at bare minimum, we might get like a specialized ground to air weapon to attack bombers with. But I think the more realistic solution would probably just be anti-air ammo. So get used to building a facility building that can make an alternative ammo type for your 120 guns, your mortar tubes, maybe your 20 millimeter weapons like your Mercutio armored car or your highwaymen or your like javelin vehicles that have typhoons attached to it. Maybe those will be our ground to air combat assets. But also keep in mind that when Inferno came out and we got fire weapons, we only got the real counter to fire weapons a couple of months after the patch dropped. And that might also be the case for Airborne. Airborne might just be if there is an air target, get in your fighter plane and go fight it. We're not going to give you a tank that just shreds aircraft and makes it unusable. So, yeah. Get used to the idea of maybe making some alternative ammo, but I don't think we're gonna get like anti-air bunkers or anti-air this. That being said, AI versus air is still a little bit unknown, but I do think that at bare minimum, because aircraft aren't going to release day one, and most people are going to be building bunker bases to defend against partisans and to build up that initial marginal line for the front line itself. I think tying in existing game assets to the counterplay for air, I think that will probably be through the use of a command bunker, or as I predicted, like a tier 2 bunker to at least spot aircraft approaching your position. The main counterplay in aircraft is probably going to be PvP. So get used to QRFing a strike force coming to attack your base assets. I think the AI portion is going to be something that you're going to have to build and maintain, and it works in conjunction with existing AI garrisons like G houses or artillery garrisons or AT garrisons. I don't think we're just going to get an air coastal gun. That would be a little strange. That you can then build and place anywhere. It'll come too late in the tech tree, and it would completely mess up the entire update. So don't have your hopes up for airplane being countered by a specific building. A kryptonite anti-air gun or something like that. Right, and then for this prediction video, airfields and aircraft tier. That's the two main things to be aware of. Airfields will determine how the assets will be used and the counterplay that come with it. You can build tier 2 aircraft to counter bombers, which will be your tier 3 superweapons. And there will be other ways to counter it. Like the dive bomber will be able to deploy demolition weapons to destroy tier 3 airfields, so you have to rebuild it and you have to wait for the concrete to settle, etc., etc., etc. That's the sort of gameplay loop that we're probably going to have. Okay, so that's it for the prediction stuff. Now I'm just going to yap about stuff that I'm worried about. I've never really gone too far down the tinfoil hat conspiracy theories when it comes to air assets, but this is something that would make the game really annoying to play if the devs don't figure out a way to address it. So this is probably something that we would have to give feedback on during the dev branch. So here are some what-if scenarios that keep me up at night, and that has me really worried. First of all, tap-ups. Everyone is doing tap-ups. I'm doing tap-ups. Everyone and their mother is doing tap-ups. What's under your chair? It is tap-ups. Everyone is making 250 push guns and satchel charges and havoc charges and bringing 3 CVs into a backline, destroying a thing and then rebuilding it, and then, oh no, we don't have the thing anymore for a whole week. I think that Airborne is probably going to make this problem much worse. Specifically, the transport plane. Paratroopers dropping dudes carrying satchel charges, havoc charges, and flamethrowers will mean that we now have ways to do tap ops on things that probably shouldn't be tapped up. And the problem that this has is much more significant than people play it out to be. Right now, tap ops only succeed if the people are too lazy or too ignorant to build up backline areas for protection. This is very evident in the current War 130, where there has literally been a warden tap op every single day, and 10 of them fail, but then 2 of them succeed, and it completely ruins the backline experience for Logi players. Airborne is going to make this worse, specifically if the airplane asset is able to drop things like CVs, 250 push guns, or God forbid, chieftains or ballistas. I think that would make the game much, much, much more difficult and much more worse, because this means we would have to build concrete fortresses literally around every single relic and every single town hall in the game. Dear God Almighty, the M-sub printers that are going to be everywhere. I really hope this is not the case. So this is hopefully something that this is just keeping me up at night, and I shouldn't be worrying about it, but I am concerned if the transport plane is able to drop CVs, specifically CVs, because that means tap ops will be a lot easier to perform. I mean, hell, if this is the case, and I'm completely wrong, and CVs are just going to be on every single transport plane, cool. Then I guess what my YouTube channel is going to be like for the next 2 years. I'm just going to be doing tap ops and nothing else. Forget fighting on front lines. I'm just going to be producing CVs, symphonies, and havoc charges for the next 2 years. So yeah, Devman, I dare you. Let me drop CVs off of an airplane. I will get on the tap up fun. The next thing to worry about is this idea that we might get into a scenario if there's a tech lead on one faction as opposed to the other. In War 129, this was a really big scare because the Wardens were a tech level and a half behind the Colonials when it came to Iron Tech. And that meant that Colonials had artillery for like an entire day before the Wardens did. If this is the case, specifically with Bomber Tech, and there's no pre-prepared plan to stop a Tier 3 airfield from being rebuilt, we might literally get into a scenario where the one faction gets bombers, and then they bomb the living hell out of the other faction before they have a chance to get their air assets online. So, if bombers tech for Colonials, in this example, and I go and bomb a Warden facility that's busy printing the bombers on their pads or inside their factories or whatever however the asset gets built, we might get into a scenario where the war is just over because one faction got to bombers first. Now, we don't have this counterplay with things like nukes, but nukes have a significant impact on how it shapes out the outcome of certain wars. War 126 was a clear example of we won that war because we nuked the Wardens before they had a chance to respond, and by the time they got their response nukes up, we just nuked them before they nuked us. And I feel like this is a problem that bombers will run into, or the design behind bombers will also run into. If one side just gets bombers first and fields them correctly and have a Tier 3 airfield on a front line ready to go, that might just be it for that particular war. Because like I said, bombers, really scary. Super weapon. Danger, danger. When there's an airfield that can deploy bombers, you need to go kill it. So if one faction gets there first, they might just dominate. So that is something to be concerned with. Another thing is, man, I hate hanging assets on cranes. It's not great. It looks terrible. It's really boring to QRF, and it's really boring to build and manage. So I really hope at some point we have a way to protect our assets that doesn't involve protecting it from griefers on our team. So because of this, I have a concern with low risk assets like a fighter that is able to not necessarily dehusk, but just to destroy a standing crane, is able to destroy a very expensive asset like a railstorm cannon or a BT or a SPG hanging on that, or a bomber hanging on a crane, and then you suicide a plane into it and you kill it, and then you lose that asset. Now, on paper, this isn't a bad thing because that's part of the gameplay loop. You have to protect what you built. But if there's no effective way for AI to counter planes like I predicted, then we're going to get into a scenario where regiments, large regiments, will literally go and say, hey, listen, I'm building a facility around this coal field. You can't build within 500 meters of me because I need 500-meter range around my base to protect against the kamikaze crane plane from hitting the from hitting my railstone cannon. And this will just lead to more toxicity in the game. We already do civil wars for redundant things like coal fields and salvage fields and component mines and stuff like that. I don't think the devs will be very happy if we're fighting civil wars over literal open grass areas or snow areas to build our crane farms or our crane toy stores to protect our assets. And I'm really concerned that this is a very negative direction that the game is going to go in, where the only way to protect your buildings is to build really, really large, because then we're now fighting over territory with our own faction. And this is the one thing I don't like about Foxhole. I don't like it when I have to log in to fight my own team, because then the game becomes League of Legends, and League of Legends is toxic, and you shouldn't play League of Legends. It's bad for you. I don't want Foxhole to become League. I don't want to fight my own teammates to hold my aircraft. But if this is the only way that I can protect my very expensive toys for hundreds of players to play and use, then this is the only outcome that's going to happen. You're going to get bad clanman bads building mega factories to hold a railstone cannon so that a single fighter plane can't kamikaze into the crane and kill it. So either devs need to do something like giving us the ability to store railstone cannons and BTs and stuff into storage depots would probably be the easiest solution. But they would also have to add like no-fly zones or weather control devices to make it thunderstorm above my facility every single day so that a damn plane can't fly in and kill the cranes holding my stuff. Yeah. I'm a little bit worried about this one. This one's probably the biggest one that keeps me up at night, because I really don't want to get into a scenario where you log into the game and the only way to play the game is to first Civil War 3 other regiments so that you can build a base that is good enough to defend against a 500 rare oil plane that's nothing compared to a 10,000 rare oil bomber or something like that. I don't know. Well, scary thoughts. So I really hope the dev man considers this, and this will probably be my lock-in autism feedback thread on FOD. So watch for this day to come. All right, and then the final thing is torpedo bombers. Now, I joke about this because I'm not the biggest fan of large ship naval gameplay. I really like playing in APCs and gunboats and motorboats and swimming. That's really fun. But I don't really see myself spending too much time on destroyers and battleships and submarines. But I will say this much. If aircraft can deploy torpedoes, because it said so in the concept art screenshot, I will say this much. If nothing is done to large holes, then it's going to be the end of naval warfare, and I will make that my personal mission. And the reason for this is, if dive bombers can hold torpedoes onto the plane, like they're shown in the concept art, this will be the only air asset that I'm going to be producing in bulk. Because if a frigate shows up to attack my airfield in Stemma's Landing or wherever I decide to build the airfield, I will tell you now, I will, at the moment that frigate crosses the border, I will pummel them to death with torpedoes. Until the frigate either sinks or it never leaves dry dock ever again. So, I have a vendetta against torpedoes and large holes in general. This also applies to storm cannons, don't get me wrong. Torpedoes is just the easiest one because I don't think the devs have shown a 300mm round equivalent on airplanes. I really hope that's not a thing, or else that's what I'm going to be making the entire war. But if torpedoes are going to be a thing, and if it's the full Moray torpedo that we've already seen, this is going to be the end of naval warfare. You will not you will not be able to use your frigate or battleship, because if you cross the border, there will be 3 to 4 dive bombers with torpedoes attached to them to destroy your stuff, or at the very least cause a large leak that will force you to retreat. So I sincerely hope that devs do something about this, or else it will literally be end for naval warfare. It doesn't matter where you build your dry dock. It doesn't matter how many ships you have. It doesn't matter how many players you have involved in QRF. I will sacrifice and I will suicide dive bombers to put large holes in a long hook that's about to deploy, or a bluefin that's about to do a naval landing. It will be the end of the vision for naval warfare. So, this will be my other lock-in autism Foxhole official Discord thread the moment that the dev branch comes out. I really, really would like more people to get behind the idea that large holes are bad for the game. And if Bore torpedoes still make large holes, and that's what airplanes are going to be deploying, this is going to majorly disrupt the naval warfare gameplay loop. And as much as I hate large ships, I do acknowledge that this is a very interesting gameplay loop for a lot of players. And I sincerely hope that they don't get their fun ruined by me. But if this change does not go through, fair word of warning, I am just going to be building planes that drop torpedoes. That's not going to be good for the game. All right. So that's it. That's the end of the Airborne Yap. Thanks so much for listening in. It's now the end of the series. I will see you all for the Airborne dev stream reaction video, which I'll probably do a recording of. And I'm very excited to see what devs have cooking. But that's it for me. Thanks for listening in. And as always, leave your comments in the section below. Cheerio!